Hola, hola, and welcome to the Speaker Movement podcast. I am your host, Steph, a public speaker and coach for creatives who are looking to enter their speaker era in order to grow their brand and amplify their impact in sustainable ways. I don't usually get a chance to scroll my phone in the morning. My son usually wakes up right before I do, so he's my alarm. I walk across the apartment and I just go ahead and take care of him, right? Change diaper, feed him breakfast, and do all the things that you typically do at the beginning of the day for somebody else as opposed to for myself. But literally this morning, I don't know what happened. I think it was probably that it was his second birthday last night and he went to bed a little bit later than usual. He slept in, which means my internal clock had the opportunity for the first or second time in 2 years to wake me up without my son being the one that wakes me up. And as I was laying there in bed, I'm like, okay, do I start my day? Do I go shower, brush my teeth, have breakfast? Maybe I meditate for the first time in 2 to almost 3 years. Like, what am I supposed to do with all this free time? And I think a very unconscious old habit kind of like crept in because I reached for my phone and I started checking my notifications. Something I haven't done in a very long time, as you can probably imagine. And I ended up on Threads, I think probably because I was having fun with Threads literally as I was falling asleep. Not the best way to fall asleep and wake up, but hey, here we are. And I was scrolling through Threads, and one of the posts that I saw, I really wanted to respond or quote it or interact with it in some way. But in that moment, the only thing that came up was something along the lines of, "You are wrong." And I'm like, that's maybe not the best energy to start my day or to start a conversation with a perfect stranger, right? Like, we should be able to lead with kindness as opposed to just pointing at each other and just faulting each other for our own opinions and beliefs and experiences. I don't want people doing that to me. So thankfully, I didn't do it. But I am going to bring that conversation forward today for the podcast because what they were sharing is not that it's wrong, but it's not my experience. And if it's not my experience, then I know that it doesn't have to be everybody else's experience, right? This is probably something that would be really helpful for you to hear in this moment. And the thread, what it was saying, it had to do with people who pitch poorly to be guests and be interviewed on podcasts, which I beyond relate to that. It's like, personally, I have a solo podcast. So if you're pitching me, it's kind of like, do you even know who you're pitching? Because as you can tell, I do not interview folks on here. So although good job like shooting your shot, you're probably going to be denied. And so I agreed with that part, but then they were giving advice around the fact that you're better off not wasting your time pitching to be a guest on podcasts because that strategy is not doing what you think it's going to be doing for your brand in terms of growing your brand, bringing in clients and sales. And I was sitting there reading that and I'm like, but that's my number one strategy. That's my number one visibility and revenue generating strategy for my business. Not exclusively podcast guesting, but podcast guesting is a big part of that. It's just public speaking as a whole. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, how do I tell you that you're wrong? Like I said, I didn't, but I think this is a conversation that's important for us to be having because I make multiple five figures off of podcast interviews. And that's an incredibly massive and epic money making activity in my business. Now, of course, not all podcast interviews are the same, which means there are podcast interviews that I do that, at least as far as I know, and at least to date, they have not brought in any single sales, leads, etc. into my business. And that's okay. Maybe I'll never be able to track some of it, right? Maybe there are, in fact, sales that I've made that came specifically from a certain podcast interview and I'll never find out about it. And that's also okay. Some of those get to be more about the experience. They get to be for fun. They get to be to grow in different ways, not necessarily to make money for your business. But making multiple five figures, signing private clients, mastermind clients, making sales into master classes and workshops and templates and passive income, all through a 30-minute conversation or even a 1-hour conversation. Some of them end up being that long. That is a reality in my business and it's a reality for a lot of my clients. So I think it's important for us to be having those conversations because I would much rather spend sounds a bit of an exaggeration, but I would much rather spend every day this week guesting on different podcasts and sharing my story and connecting with really cool podcast hosts and really cool people than creating content on social media, which was the advice that the original poster was giving on Threads, which, hey, not necessarily bad advice, because posting on social media is a great money-making strategy. It's a great way to grow your brand. I still show up on social media borderline daily, sometimes multiple times a day. It really depends on the season of business. Sometimes I show up once a day, or once a week rather. But it's not about what strategy is better. It's about the fact that both strategies are good. And if we are pointing fingers and saying you're wrong and your strategy sucks and don't waste your time on podcast guesting because it's just not going to do what you think it's going to do, then you are closing doors and shutting people down on this vision that they have, on the potential for growth and the potential for connection, the potential for sales, because they're going to listen to your advice because they trust you. But what if your advice is wrong, right? So instead of saying don't do this, what about we just lean into what should you do? What do you recommend, instead of shooting other people's strategies down, right? In any case, I think it's really important, and I think it's going to be really valuable for you right now for me to dive into how it is that this came to be. Specifically, there is one podcast interview that lives rent-free in my mind because it generated an additional $28,000 in sales into my business. And although, yes, I had to prep a little bit for the podcast interview, there was a little bit of like relationship building and community behind the scenes happening before the interview itself. Once I did the interview, other than continuing to maintain relationships, continuing to show up like I was already going to show up, I didn't have to essentially lift a finger. And through that one interview, I brought in multiple sales into my business. So how I booked that specific interview, it's interesting because I didn't pitch myself out of the blue. I wasn't invited out of the blue either. One of the things that is really crucial for this specific experience is that I was organically building relationships behind the scenes with the podcast hosts and their community without any strings attached. So really what happened is I was building this relationship with somebody on social media who happened to be in the same field, the same industry as me, which funnily enough, I think is key, because a lot of us look at our competition as exactly that, as competition, as people that we shouldn't be working with, we shouldn't be collaborating with, we shouldn't be speaking on their platforms or at their events, because we're going to be either stealing their clientele or they're going to steal ours, right? And it's like, what if there's enough space for all of us to grab the mic, for all of us to share our stories, to come together and collaborate and serve our mutual audiences, and then mutually benefit from that experience? When you lead with that sense of community, of abundance, of we get to collaborate and both win from this experience, it's so much more rewarding and it feels less icky and competitive and manipulative, right? So that's what was happening. We were just becoming friends. That was it. We would chit chat. We would react to each other's content. And as that was happening, they were building a community for their podcast. It was a brand new podcast. They had a very small following. And because we already had a good relationship going, they invited me personally to become a so-called founding member for this community. Really what they wanted me to do is to help nurture their community, to help make sure that there was people engaging in there, that we were having fun, that it wasn't just a Facebook group where it was total crickets and nobody was participating and really getting anything out of that, right? So I said, yes, absolutely. It was an honor to be considered that good of a friend or that trustworthy, that they would want me to be that kind of person inside the community to really nurture those conversations and those friendships. And I figured, like, hey, this is a cool opportunity for me also to be visible in some way. Even if I'm not going to be rah, this is my business, come work with me and this is how I can support you and how you can pay me, it's still visibility, even if I'm not selling. So I ended up saying yes, absolutely. And one of the key things here is I became one of the best collaborators. I don't know how many founding members they had, but I know for a fact I was one of the most visible, if you will. I was constantly engaging, whether that was creating new posts in there, initiating conversations. I was answering and replying to other people's posts, maybe giving advice or cheering them on or whatever. I was almost showing up as if I was the host of that community, which worked for me in that moment. I had the capacity for it, so why not? It was fun. I got to connect with other peers in my industry, potential clients. Like, it was a really cool opportunity and a really fun experience for me. Eventually, this ended up solidifying the friendship or relationship that I had with the podcast host even more, that they invited me to go ahead and interview on their podcast. I can't remember exactly when, but it was either season 1 or season 2 that I got interviewed. So again, very early on in the podcast journey. I believe that community had less than 1,000 members, which is incredible, still really good, but still less than 1,000. I don't remember what my follower count was on social media at the time, but it was probably very freaking similar. So whether I was creating content on social media or showing up there, the visibility was the same, even if the way that I was building authority was very different, because again, I wasn't constantly marketing myself and pitching myself. I was basically leading that entire interaction with just one thought in mind. Let's make friends, let's get seen, make connections, maybe they could lead to something cool. That's it. Now, the reason that this really worked is because the relationship that I had with the podcast host was genuine. Neither of us were looking to get something out of it. It was literally, how can we support each other? I supported them as becoming a founding member. Then they were, in essence, we were mutually supporting each other, collaborating when I went to guest on their podcast. So it was very much just organic, no strings attached. There's no hidden agenda where we're trying to sneak or get something out of it. Now, here's the cool part, because we now have the community aspect, we have the growing visibility, we have the public speaking opportunity on their podcast. And this is where public speaking turns into revenue, because folks now within that community and beyond started to tune into that podcast interview that I did. And as they did so, they got to simultaneously experience me continuing to show up inside of the community. So they got to learn from me on the podcast, connect with me as a human inside the community, and be like, wow, like Steph's actually pretty damn smart. And she's so kind and nice and friendly. Like, this is a cool person, right? Like, I respect them. I trust them. And all that ended up leading to me making 12 sales from one podcast interview and community building. One of the things that I want to make abundantly clear is kind of like what I said earlier on in this episode. Not all podcast interviews are made the same, right? Not all public speaking opportunities are made the same, meaning they're not all necessarily going to lead to incredible opportunities, public speaking gigs, and paying clients. But the ones that do, and one of the things that I'm very intentional with when coaching my clients, is that you want to make a clear connection between your speaker topic and your content on your marketing platforms and your product suite, your offers, whatever it is that you're selling. Reason being that you can have an incredible conversation, build a lot of trust and rapport with people, and then there's no obvious next step for folks to take. It's just, oh, that was interesting, that was insightful, that was entertaining, that was inspiring. But I don't feel an urge to take a next step, or maybe I do, but you don't sell anything that I need based on that conversation. So for me, in this instance, my topic was so specific. It wasn't broad. It was specific to one tangible piece of advice, one tangible way to help people within their own business, something that I was very well versed in, something that was needed in the industry at that time. And that led very naturally into my product suite, so that, like I said earlier, folks could work with me on a one-on-one basis. They could invest in my group coaching programs. They could invest in workshops, master classes, passive products, because every single thing, which it's not necessary for it to be everything, but every single thing in my product suite connected beautifully into that one interview. Now, to break it down even further for you, so you get a taste of what this looks like within the product suite, I'm going to take a moment to read right off my notes, because I wanted to make sure to get these numbers right. The revenue breakdown for this podcast interview and what it brought into my business was $18,930 into private coaching, right? That was my pricing at the time for, like, I believe 4 different clients. Then there was $8,420, which made up 3 group program sales, $1,090 for 5 low ticket sales, which were comprised of course, templates, masterclass, and workshop, for a total revenue of $28,440. So that's a whole lot of money. That's 30 grand from, I don't know exactly, 45-minute conversation, give or take. So yes, I would much rather spend all my days doing podcast interviews, speaking at conferences, virtually, in person, and doing all the things public speaking in a very sustainable and fun way, as opposed to posting content on social media. Now, don't worry, I'm probably not going anywhere. I'm going to keep showing up on social media because it is also fun, and I get to talk and connect with all of you and so many other amazing people inside of my community. But public speaking is where it's at for me and a lot of my clients. And if it's where it's at for you, then I encourage you to reach out. I've got lots of free and paid resources that will help you as you whether enter your speaker era or go all in on your speaker era. You can check a lot of the links out in the show notes. And otherwise, I will see you in the interwebs and inside the next episode of the Speaker Movement podcast.